Pepper spray hissed through the courthouse hallway, filling the air with a choking chemical burn. Panicked onlookers stumbled back, some shielding their eyes, others pulling out phones to record the chaos. In the midst of this stinging cloud stood Karen Parker, visibly furious, canister in hand, until the moment she realized the person she had just assaulted was the very judge presiding over her pending case. Her arrogant glare morphed into stunned disbelief as security rushed in, handcuffs at the ready. No one in that hallway could have predicted how one morning's petty confrontation would spiral into such a life-altering nightmare. Sometime earlier, Marilyn Jones began her day the same way she had almost every morning for the past decade, by doing a small act of kindness that no one else seemed to notice. This time it was outside the bustling downtown courthouse just past dawn. The line at the nearby cafe snaked around the block, filled with bleary-eyed lawyers juggling leather briefcases, frantically tapping notes into smartphones, and a few courthouse regulars trying not to spill their coffees on the gleaming sidewalk. At the very front stood an elderly woman fumbling in her purse for spare change. Her brow creased with worry as she realized she was short of the price for a small latte. Marilyn, noticing the woman's distress, quietly stepped forward and covered the extra cost. "Please let me," she offered in a gentle tone, earning a grateful smile from the older woman. But just as Marilyn turned to place her own order, a sharp, irritated voice cut through the air. "Excuse me, do you think you can just cut in line like that?" The speaker was Karen, a woman in a pressed blouse, stylish jacket, and an air of self-importance that hovered around her like cheap cologne. She tapped her foot impatiently, lips pursed in a disapproving scowl. One hand clutched her phone, the other was perched on her hip as though ready for battle. Marilyn calmly explained she wasn't cutting. She'd only stopped to help pay for the elderly woman's coffee. But Karen's glare hardened, her voice growing more pointed with each syllable. "I don't care what your excuse is," she spat. "I've been waiting here, and no one gets special treatment, especially not someone who doesn't even understand how to follow basic rules." A hush fell over the crowd. Though no one openly intervened, some perhaps didn't want to get involved, while others were too busy gawking at Karen's scathing outburst, their phones discreetly recording. Marilyn felt a hot knot of indignation tightening in her chest. She took a measured breath, trying to remain composed. She had encountered this exact brand of contempt before, a tone that carried far more than just impatience at the cafe line. Despite the rising tension, Marilyn chose to de-escalate. She gave a small nod, took her latte and stepped aside. But the moment left her unsettled, really unsettled. She could still feel Karen's eyes boring into her back, as though she were some intruder who had dared to violate an unwritten social code. Marilyn forced her shoulders to relax and moved on, trying to brush off the confrontation. After all, she had important work awaiting her inside that courthouse. Little did she know just how quickly she would face Karen again, and under far more explosive circumstances. What happened next changed everything. The mid-morning hum in the courthouse lobby was a study in organized chaos. Lawyers hustled across polished marble floors, their arms crammed with heavy files. Plaintiffs and defendants alike hovered near the security checkpoint, shuffling through metal detectors and scanning the overhead displays to find their assigned courtrooms. A faint smell of printer ink and furniture polish lingered in the air. Marilyn sat on a bench by the wide windows, reviewing a thick folder of legal documents. She still felt a trace of residual stress from the cafe incident. "Let it go," she told herself. "You have more pressing matters to handle." Outside, beams of sunshine reflected off the glass doors, signaling a deceptively calm day. Suddenly, commotion flared by the security screening. Raised voices echoed, bouncing off the high ceilings. Marilyn's gaze snapped up, and her stomach clenched when she recognized a familiar figure. Karen. The same posture. The same unmistakable indignation. This time, Karen was arguing with two security officers, her tone shrill enough to turn heads. "I'm telling you, I don't have anything illegal." Karen's voice rang out as she clutched her handbag as though it were a lifeline. Then Marilyn saw it, a small black canister in Karen's grip. Before the guards could react, Karen's frustration culminated in a swift, reckless squeeze of the pepper spray nozzle. A fierce, burning mist hissed out, filling the air with chemical fumes. People shrieked in alarm. The metal detector beeped wildly as the guards rushed forward, arms raised to shield their eyes. Marilyn, who was just steps away, felt her eyes start to sting and tear up almost instantly. A scorching pain seared her face and throat. She staggered back, her vision blurred by hot tears. Karen's tirade continued even as the crowd recoiled. "Maybe this will teach you all a lesson about messing with me," she screamed, sounding almost delirious. Cameras flashed. Some bystanders had whipped out their phones, capturing every moment. Others rushed to help those coughing and blinded by the spray. Through the haze and burning sensation, Marilyn felt a swell of outrage. It wasn't just about the physical pain. It was about the toxic hatred fueling Karen's actions. Even in her disorientation, Marilyn could see Karen's expression twisted with a kind of anger that went far beyond a simple argument over waiting lines. Security officers finally subdued Karen, prying the pepper spray from her trembling fingers. An officer barked out her rights, declaring she was under arrest for assault. As paramedics hurried over, Marilyn rubbed her face with a damp cloth, her eyes watering so intensely she could barely see. She heard Karen raging. "I know people in high places. You're going to regret this." But each boast rang hollow, a desperate attempt to maintain control she no longer had. Marilyn's heart pounded. In the confusion, a younger court clerk recognized her. "Ma'am, are you all right?" "Here, let me help you," he said, guiding her to a nearby first aid station. The paramedics flushed her eyes with cool water, trying to ease the fierce burn. Marilyn sucked in shallow breaths, torn between shock and a growing resolve. Here of all places, she thought bitterly, where the law is supposed to reign supreme. Meanwhile, Karen was still fuming as they escorted her through the hallway in handcuffs. She yelled about her connections and insisted she would get off without so much as a slap on the wrist. In that moment, Marilyn felt a surge of determination. "You have no idea where you are or who you've just sprayed. This is the turning point. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay tuned to see how our hero puts everyone in their place." Within the austere, high-ceilinged courtroom, the atmosphere was palpably tense. Rows of hard wooden benches faced the imposing judge's bench, where a sleek microphone and a gavel sat waiting. The overhead lights glowed dully against the dark wood paneling, highlighting the silent portraits of judges past, each painting seeming to watch the proceedings with grave interest. Karen, now decidedly less confident, stood at the defendant's table, her perfectly applied makeup smudged. She gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles turned white. People whispered in hushed tones, eyes flicking between Karen and the door to the judge's chambers. No lawyer had yet come to her rescue. She seemed to be alone in the gravest possible sense. Then a bailiff cleared his throat and announced, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Jones." The heavy side door swung open with a low creak. A figure stepped onto the raised platform, black robes flowing. Marilyn Jones. Soft gasps spread through the crowd. Even though some still had red, watery eyes from the pepper spray fiasco, their vision was clear enough to see the look of absolute shock on Karen's face. Marilyn's eyes, still slightly irritated, shone with cool focus. The emotional toll of the morning was evident in a faint trembling of her lashes, but her posture remained resolute. She settled behind the bench, carefully placing her gavel down. In that charged moment, the air seemed to freeze. Even the slightest shuffle of feet or rustle of paper sounded thunderous. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She glanced at the bailiffs, at the attorneys, then back to Marilyn. Her bravado had vanished. Gone was the sneering, self-assured stance from earlier. In its place stood a woman grappling with the stark reality that the person she had just assaulted was the judge now presiding over her case. The trial proceedings began, and Marilyn's voice filled the courtroom, clear and controlled. It carried the authority of her position, but also a deeper, personal determination. "We are here to address the state versus Karen Parker, charged with assault, disorderly conduct, and contempt of court. Each charge fell like a hammer blow, resonating with the weight of the law. Karen attempted to speak, but the words caught in her throat. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. She looked every bit the panicked defendant, eyes darting from corner to corner as if searching for an escape hatch. Whispers swirled among the spectators. Some realized they'd caught the confrontation on their phones. Now, the same unsuspecting black woman from the cafe was standing at the pinnacle of judicial authority. Marilyn outlined the details of the arrest, the eyewitness account, and the legal ramifications. The paramedics' report described the severity of the pepper spray incident, not just on Marilyn but on multiple bystanders. Karen blanched, understanding for the first time the gravity of what she had done. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. Marilyn paused before delivering the next statement, allowing the silence to settle. When she spoke again, her words were measured. "This court does not tolerate acts of violence or hate," she said. Though her tone was impartial, there was no mistaking the personal significance behind it. For a moment, it seemed the portraits of past judges loomed even closer, as if in agreement. The tension reached its pinnacle when Karen tried one final plea. "Please, Judge Jones, I'm truly sorry. I had no idea." But the court was not a place for convenient apologies. Whether Karen was remorseful or merely terrified was anyone's guess. What mattered was that justice would be served. In the aftermath, Karen was left with a sobering set of consequences: a steep bail, mandatory court appearances, and the very real possibility of jail time. She also faced civil liabilities if Marilyn or the other victims chose to pursue them. The once self-confident woman, who had boasted of high connections, now stood before the bench trembling and alone. In the hallway outside, staff and onlookers exchanged astonished glances. Word spread like wildfire through text messages, quick phone calls, and social media posts. That woman pepper-sprayed a judge before realizing who she was. It became the day's scandalous highlight, an unmistakable example of how prejudice and anger can backfire in spectacular fashion. When Marilyn finally removed her robes in her private chambers, she inhaled a shaky breath. The sting around her eyes lingered, but so did a sense of vindication. This was where justice was supposed to unfold, and in the end it had. She straightened her spine, feeling the burden of the morning lift, even if only slightly. Stepping out into the afternoon sun, she passed the same spot where she had helped the elderly woman just hours earlier. The memory made her heart ache and swell at the same time. Ache for the ugliness Karen had unleashed, swell for the justice served in her courtroom. Despite the day's turmoil, Marilyn felt fortified by the knowledge that sometimes the law isn't just a distant ideal but a real force that can deliver accountability, and a little poetic karma. No one who witnessed the scene, from the cafe line to the courthouse floor, would soon forget the moment a Karen assaulted a stranger she presumed insignificant, only to learn that this stranger was the very judge with the power to decide her fate. In those silent corridors of justice, a hush of respect followed Marilyn wherever she went, a testament to the truth that prejudice can only loom large until the law stands in its way.